Hello, and welcome to Beyond Biotech, the weekly podcast from Labiotech. I'm Dylan Kassane, and this is episode 180 for the podcast. Today, I'm joined by not one, not two, but three guests with their take on the biotech year ahead. In December, we tasked Labiotech journalists Jules Adam, Roohi Peter, and Willow Shah-Neville with the task of identifying the 5 biotech players that they thought would be the ones to watch in 2026. Now you can read that article at Labiotech.eu, and we've linked it in the show notes here in your podcast player too. But on today's episode, I'm joined by Jules, Roohi, and Willow, who explain a little more about the companies that caught their eye and what might be expected of those companies in the year ahead. 15 companies, 3 journalists, all in one special podcast as we uncover the companies to watch in 2026. First up, Labiotech reporter Jules Adam.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Jules, I'm going to start off with a question I'm putting to everybody here on the team. What were the criteria you had in mind when you made this list? What qualifies for you as a company to watch?
Yeah, well, usually when we do these kind of lists at Labiotech, we have a clear criteria. It can be geography, technology, or even disease area. But for this one, it was much broader, I feel. I mean, companies you should keep an eye on in 2026. It could be really any company for any reason, right? So instead of having a clear set of criteria, I just went with the companies I either talked about or talked to. And wrote about, and whose narrative particularly interested me throughout the year. So for most, I'd say it's a mix of 2025 momentum and 2026 promise or potential milestones, although I guess there would be one exception in my selection. But of course, many other companies that I haven't picked could have made the cut. I just went with the flow and the companies that stood out to me throughout the year.
Well, let's look at those companies. First came off the rank, Abivax. Now, they have a microRNA-based therapy to regulate immune responses. They had an incredible 2025. What puts them on the list for 2026?
Yeah, well, like you said, I feel like Abivax was almost a must-have on the list because of the 2025 performance. I mean, they reported phase 3 induction data in ulcerative colitis, and the market response was just incredible. The stock moved around 5-fold following the results. Like you said, the candidate is an oral microRNA based drug, and they showed it can get patients into remission. But the story isn't finished yet. Very much like the performance of the company in 2026, the question will be around durability. This year, the company will share some maintenance data, so it will tell us if the effect that made the market react so strongly will hold over time. And on top of that, there's been some rumors about potential M&A, including about Eli Lilly looking into the French company. So I wouldn't overinterpret it, but it does have another layer on top of the results they shared and the overall performances of Abivax. So it's only about, can they maintain this momentum, I guess.
Next up on the list was AAVantgarde Bio. Now, they raised some cash in the last couple of months, about 140 million or so in a Series B. But there's more than just the cash that caught your eye.
Yeah, of course. Well, first off, the 140 million Series B does make it stand out for a European company. That's quite significant. I would say. And I've spoken to the team at the time of this Series B, and what really interested me is the niche they're operating in. So they work on gene therapies for retinal diseases caused by genes that are typically too large for standard AAV vectors. So their 2 lead programs also sit in slightly different competitive dynamics too. So the first one is Stargardt disease, And this area is becoming a much more active space with several approaches being tested. So in this particular context, the company is part of a broader race, so that will be interesting to look at. But there's also Usher syndrome type 1b, which is much closer to a first-in-class situation where there could be very few credible, clinical options for this disease. So in 2025, both programs moved into the clinic at the same stage. So next year, well, this year, the focus will be on getting more human data to see if the results and the promise holds up. So even cautious proof of concept would be a strong signal in those areas that have been pretty challenging. So yeah, I'm keeping an eye on this company because of the recent Series B, but also to see how they will perform in one very niche area and one that is a bit more competitive.
Talking of really interesting areas and competitive areas, you shone a spotlight on ITM, which is Isotope Technologies Munich, uh, and they're working in radiopharma, and you've written quite a bit about radiopharma in the last couple of months. What makes ITM stand out?
Well, with ITM, it's less about a single company story, and it's more about, yeah, talking about the radio pharma field more broadly. So yeah, I was looking into radio pharma in 2025 as a whole, I would say. Over the past few years, I feel like the field really stood out, not just making deal headlines, but it's seriously now being seen as a platform rather than a niche. We saw continued big pharma interest, but also more attention is being paid to some less glamorous part of the value chain, isotope supply, manufacturing capacity, logistics. And to me, that is a sign that the field is maturing. And I feel like ITM sits right at the right intersection. They're one of the European players that have been around long enough to see multiple radiopharma cycles. They have their own pipeline, and they also have isotope supply capabilities. So I felt they were a good barometer of how the field is evolving. So for 2026, I would look at the field as a whole. Some clinical success showed that the field can provide, and there's also a new generation of alpha emitters that are more powerful, but at the same time more targeted. And with now most big pharma players in the space, I think the dynamics in the field as a whole will be very interesting. And yeah, of course, keep an eye on ITM because it's grounded, but the field more broadly is also very interesting.
Another really commercial player or potential commercial player is your fourth pick, MaaT Pharma. You wrote about this as a company that might be on the verge of commercializing a microbiome therapy. Tell me about that. What are you looking for?
Yeah, well, it's one of the rare microbiome companies that are generally close to market, at least in Europe. It would indeed be the first drug of its kind in Europe. So that's why I put it on my list. The lead product is being developed for acute graft versus host disease. So there's still limited options for that. And in 2025, they reported positive phase 3 data and then went on to submit a marketing authorization application to the EMA. So what we will be looking at in 2026 is obviously the decision from the EMA. And similarly to my previous pick, I'm looking at it as a whole. I mean, if the company does get approval, it wouldn't be just a win for the company, but it would also be one of the first real example of a microbiome-based therapy reaching patients in Europe. And we know how these first big wins can really build trust for investors, but also for regulators. So yeah, that's the main reason. And of course, for the company, there's also some very practical questions. Can they manufacture and deliver at scale? How quickly can transplant center adopt it? So yeah, keeping an eye on the company specifically, but also on the broader field.
And now maybe for the final one, it's one that's not quite like the others, Novo Nordisk. This is a company that's probably on everybody's radar already, thanks to Wegovy and Ozempic. Why should we be looking at them in 2026?
Yeah, I don't plan on putting Novo on the radar of everyone. Everybody knows about Novo. But the reason I still picked them for 2026 is that I feel that this year, it started in 2025. I feel that in 2026 they will have to maybe defend their throne a bit. They're still going to be a very strong company, obviously, but we all know them for their GLP-1s, and it seems that the field is becoming, yeah, something different now. It's in a whole other dimension. I wrote about them earlier this year because apparently they let a patent lapse, a GLP-1 patent lapse in Canada, which is one of the biggest markets for their drug. And of course, the franchise, will remain very strong, but it does open the door for cheaper versions, for generics. So I feel it's interesting to see this because it's also very symbolic. It's a big strategic pressure for a company that built its story about GLP-1s. And second, I mentioned it, but the field is becoming much more competitive too. There was the whole Metsera episode where Novo tried to outbid Pfizer for a GLP-1 company. Pfizer ended up acquiring the company, but it does show that Novo wants to diversify, its GLP-1 pipeline. And third, Novo does have another candidate that it's planning to move forward in 2026, amycretin. So it's another next gen shot at metabolic health. So it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. So yeah, very big gun, but it feels like there's going to be some interesting strategic things to defend for them in 2026.
And finally, Jules, looking across these 5 companies, do you see any shared themes that try and tie your selections together? Is there one common trend that whips through them?
I might disappoint you, but I wouldn't say there is a common theme between these companies. Maybe some listeners will find one, but I just say they're companies that I'm interested in. Of course, there are some fields that I will follow more closely. Radio pharma is an obvious one, but also I think it's interesting to see how GLP-1 is moving beyond diabetes and obesity, and the field, like I said, is becoming much more competitive. So yeah, not really a common thread, but all companies that I'm interested in, and I think they're going to be interesting to follow in 2026.
Sure. Thank you for joining us on Beyond Biotech.
Yeah, very happy to be here.
Next in line, Labiotech reporter Willow Shah-Neville.
Thank you very much.
Willow, there are thousands of biotechs and biopharma companies out there, and any one of them will tell you that they're doing something pretty special. You were asked to pick out 5 companies from among those thousands. How did you make your choice?
Yeah, so I guess I chose my selection of companies based on, and I mean, this might sound quite obvious, but whether they had promising clinical candidates, most of them being late stage, whether they'd had any positive news this year, whether that be clinical updates or fundraising, and also whether they were expecting any upcoming data or planning to initiate any clinical trials in 2026. Obviously, yeah, I could have chosen a multitude of different companies that fit these criteria, but I think ultimately I kind of just went with 5 companies that had really caught my attention throughout the year, mainly when I've been working on the content for the newsletter. So yeah, I'd say that's probably generally what informed most of my choices.
Let's talk a little bit about those companies. We'll start with Kardigan. It's Kardigan with a K there. They work in cardiovascular disease and they have this personalized medicine approach. Now, they raised money in 2025. Tell me about that, and was it only the cash that caught your attention there?
So at first, I think it was definitely the cash that caught my attention. I mean, kind of to launch with like 300 million in Series A financing back in January 2025. and to then raise another 254 million in Series B funding in October was, well, it struck me as very impressive. But then when I realized that they also have 3 late-stage cardiovascular assets, and they said they also have a goal of, quote, delivering multiple medicines at a pace not previously seen in cardiovascular health. So that also piqued my interest. And also the 3 of their therapies are basically meant to address the root causes of diseases that currently have no treatment options. So if they do receive approval, it's, firstly, it's fantastic feat for the company, but it would also obviously be amazing for the patients who suffer from those diseases. And yeah, just to expand on that, the 3 assets are the danicamtiv, tonlamarsen, and atacicept. I hope I pronounced this correctly, but apologies if I didn't. So the first one, danicamtiv, it's a cardiac myosin activator. They licensed it from Bristol Myers Squibb, and it was originally discovered by Myocardia. But it's proven in phase 2b studies to be well tolerated, with significant improvements in ventricular and atrial function in patients with genetic dilated cardiomyopathy, which that's basically, it's a condition where the heart becomes enlarged and it can't pump blood effectively. Sorry, and then the other therapies, tonlamarsen is a angiotensinogen targeted bridging therapy, which also is in phase 2b studies. And the company says it's designed to interrupt the dangerous cycle of acute severe hypertension, which is is otherwise known as extremely high blood pressure. And then the final candidate, atacicept, is a oral soluble guanylate cyclase activator, which is in phase 3 studies for the treatment of calcific aortic valve stenosis, which it basically involves the narrowing and stiffening of the aortic valve. And there are currently no therapies for that delay the progression of the disease. So Kardigan believes that their therapy could potentially be an alternative to what is commonly described as like watchful waiting, which, yeah, I guess is kind of self-explanatory. It just means that at the minute patients with the disease are closely monitored, and valve replacement is generally delayed until symptoms or heart dysfunction appear. But yeah, we're actually expecting multiple data readouts for Kardigan's therapies in 2026. So it could be quite an exciting year for them and for the cardiovascular space if everything goes well.
Yeah, well, there's another company on your list that's working in that cardio space. That's Braveheart Bio. It's just a fantastic name to start with. But tell me about Braveheart Bio. You said that they could even maybe be a rival to BMS. What makes them so special?
Yeah, so Braveheart Bio is a company I only took note of very recently. Again, looking at doing the content for the newsletter, because they launched in November 2025 with 185 million in Series A funding, and an aim of transforming care in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which, yeah, is a genetic heart condition where the heart muscle thickens, makes it harder to pump blood, leads to symptoms like chest pain, shortness of breath, fainting, palpitations, etc. So yeah, back in September, Braveheart became kind of one of the many biotechs that have recently turned to a Chinese company to basically sort of like fill up their pipeline. It paid 65 million upfront to Jiangsu Hengrui Pharmaceuticals for a small molecule selective cardiac myosin inhibitor, which it's known as BHB 1893. And this candidate has already been extensively tested. So it's been in a phase 2 study in symptomatic obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's also in an ongoing phase 2 study in non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and it's in an ongoing phase 3 study as well in obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy in China. And yeah, as you mentioned, there is a possibility that this drug could be a rival to Bristol Myers Squibb's Camzyos, which is also a cardiac myosin inhibitor. And in 2022, it became the first drug to be approved for the obstructive form of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is also actually the most common form. Yeah, and this was actually it was the only drug available for the condition until very recently. Because the company Cytokinetics, they also have a cardiac myosin inhibitor called Mycorrhiza, which was literally just approved in December for the treatment of the condition as well. But there's obviously still a gap in the market for this disease, and Braveheart hope that their candidate can be a best-in-class treatment for it, and they're planning to initiate late-stage clinical development of the drug in 2026.
Yeah, well, if we move on to gene therapy now and away from that cardio space, you picked out Beam Therapeutics. I'm going to quote you here. You describe them as having a newer and potentially safer gene editing approach. Tell me about the approach. Why is it special, and why are we watching them in 2026?
Yeah, so Beam Therapeutics is very much a front runner in the base editing space. Actually, in 2023, it was the first company to treat a patient in the clinic with a base editing candidate in the US. And so base editing it's basically a newer type of gene editing that uses components from CRISPR systems together with other enzymes to create precise changes in a single DNA base. Like, for example, changing the chemical letter from A to G or from C to T. But it basically does this without cutting both strands of DNA. And because of this, it's potentially more efficient and safer than traditional CRISPR methods because it essentially minimizes errors and allows for targeted correction of point mutations that cause many inherited or genetic diseases. And yeah, so the technology is still quite early stage. But Beam have 2 candidates in phase 1/2 trials. One of them, Beam 302, is a top priority for the company. So back in March, they announced that it had demonstrated the first ever clinical genetic correction of a disease-causing mutation in AATD, which is a genetic disorder where the body basically doesn't produce enough of the alpha-1 antitrypsin protein, which it normally protects the lungs and liver from damage. But yeah, Beam is now expecting to provide a broad update on this candidate in early 2026 with new clinical data. And yeah, and then the other candidate, it's now called Risticel. It used to be known as Beam 101. But that's being developed for patients with sickle cell disease. And the company's already reported some positive phase 1/2 data for it. And I think it's also encouraging here to know that, of course, gene editing very much works to treat sickle cell disease, as kind of evidenced by the approvals in 2023 of Casgevy and Lyfgenia. Yeah, and it's also worth noting that Beam, they priced a 500 million underwritten offering in March 2025, which the company said at the time would go toward things like BLA submission and pre-commercial activities for Risticel and for clinical trials, including the advancement of a potential pivotal trial for Beam 302.
Yeah, so they're definitely one to keep an eye on. Another one on your list, though, MindMed. Now, they're working in psychedelics. It's a hot area in mental health space right now, but it's also an area that's run into some problems recently. Why do you think MindMed is positioned to avoid problems? What makes them the outlier, maybe?
So investment in psychedelic drug development, it experienced quite a boom a few years ago. But the sector's faced a bit more volatility, a bit more of a challenging funding environment recently. So as an example, Compass Pathways announced in another psychedelics company, they announced in June 2025 that a phase 3 trial for its psilocybin-based depression treatment hit its primary endpoint, but the readout for that it had already been delayed beyond the original deadline of summer 2024. And when the results did finally come out, there were reports that investors were somewhat unimpressed, and it sent Compass's stock down by around 36%. And on top of that, we have Lycos Therapeutics as well, which experienced a failure in 2024 when the FDA rejected its MDMA drug for PTSD. And the FDA cited clinical trial design and other issues for the rejection. But one of the main reasons was the issue of what's known as functional unblinding, which is basically when patients and investigators can tell who received the actual therapy versus the placebo. So coming back to MindMed, they seem to have avoided all of these problems so far. And they seem to have been very well prepared in terms of their trial design, etc. Which obviously for psychedelic drug testing can be quite exact. And it helps that their drug has also proven to be effective in various studies so far as well. So yeah, the candidate, it's called MM120. And it's received breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA and is currently in phase 3 trials for generalized anxiety disorder and also major depressive disorder. So the generalized anxiety disorder studies are expected to produce top-line results in the first and second half of 2026. And the results of the major depressive disorder study are also expected to come in the second half of 2026. So they're definitely one to watch out for. And it's also worth mentioning that MindMed raised 259 million from a public offering in November as well.
Oh, so they've got money and they've got readouts to come. The last one on your list is Kailera Therapeutics. Now, the last time we wrote about them was back in October, and they had a huge funding round, 600 million in a Series B. What are they going to do with that cash, and why should we be interested?
Yeah, so obviously that funding round really grabbed my attention. And yeah, it has assets for obesity. As we all know, this is an extremely crowded field. But investors seem to have very high hopes for Kailera's candidates, which the company actually licensed from Jiangsu Hengrui Pharmaceuticals last year, when it at the same time that it launched with another eye-watering fundraising round of 400 million. So its lead candidate is dubbed KAI 9531, and it's also in development as HRS 9531 in China. So it's an injectable GLP-1 GIP receptor dual agonist. And in July 2025, Kailera and Jiangsu Hengrui Pharmaceuticals reported that the candidate cut average weight by 17.7% versus placebo at 48 weeks across all 3 dose levels tested in a phase 3 trial in China. So to put these results into perspective, Eli Lilly's blockbuster obesity drug Zepbound has been tied to a 20.9% reduction in body weight after 36 weeks. And while it's obviously always difficult to compare across trials, but this does mean that Kailera's candidate could potentially hold its own against Zepbound, which is obviously a notion that was reinforced by investors' participation in their subsequent 600 million Series B round. And also at the start of 2025, Kailera and Jiangsu Hengrui Pharmaceuticals posted a more impressive 22.8% mean weight loss from baseline at 36 weeks in a phase 2 study. But this was actually at a higher 8 milligram dose than what they had tested in the phase 3 trial I just mentioned. And Kailera has actually previously mentioned that it would like to investigate how the drug performs at higher doses in global trials, just to see if its potential can be expanded. And I guess if the drug does perform well at higher doses, both in terms of efficacy and safety and side effects, then I guess there's no question that it could be a solid contender to Zepbound. And yeah, now after its Series B round, Kailera said that it will use the funds to launch a global phase 3 program for the asset by the end of the year, including 2 trials in adults living with obesity or overweight with comorbidities. And an additional trial in adults with a body mass index of 35 or higher. So yeah, that we can look forward to that hopefully in 2026.
Yeah, that space is not cooling down at all. Looking at all of those choices, is there a common thread there? You've got Kailera and Kardigan. They both raise a lot of money. Psychedelics, gene therapies, these are still hot spaces. Is there something that ties your choices together?
So to be completely honest with you, I don't think I wouldn't say there's too much of a common thread with my choices, apart from, yeah, maybe fundraising, especially with Kailera and Kardigan, as you said, which, I was very impressed by when I came across how much they raised. And I guess, the other biotechs on the list have also raised quite big money. So I guess that is probably what I'd say the common thread is. But apart from that, yeah, it was just, maybe slightly random.
Well, we're going to look out for us raising money in 2026. Willow, thanks for joining us today on Beyond Biotech.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, Labiotech reporter Roohi Peter. Roohi, welcome to Beyond Biotech.
Thank you.
Roohi, when you set out to choose 5 companies to watch in 2026, what are you looking for? Is it money and fundraising, clinical trials, drug launches? What drove your choices?
Yes, my picks were for the most part based on recent funding and positive clinical trial outcomes. Both these markers suggest that these biotechs are promising and they've got candidates to watch out for. And also personally, neuroscience and psychiatry are areas that interest me. So although I wasn't necessarily seeking out biopharmas in these fields, I think subconsciously this might have had a role to play.
Yeah, well, let's talk about your picks. To start with, you went for Aspen Neuroscience. So they're a neurology play. They have some cell therapies for Parkinson's disease. What makes them one to watch for you in this new year?
So Aspen Neuroscience is developing a treatment for Parkinson's disease. And as you mentioned, it is a cell therapy. They've reprogrammed cells to become stem cells that turn into neurons that produce dopamine. And these cells replace the damaged cells in the brain. Now, the company raised $115 million last year, and they're considering going public this year to potentially commercialize this candidate. And just this week, they announced that they appointed a chief commercial officer and a chief medical officer to take over that role and to take the candidate through late-stage trials and to the market potentially. So there's a lot going on, and I think the buzz means that they're one to watch out for.
For sure. There's another neuroscience company, though, on your list. That's Reunion Neuroscience. They're in the neurology space too, but they're working in psychedelics. What makes them worth watching?
Yes, Reunion Neuroscience is another one in the neurology space that I picked. Their lead candidate is a psychedelic. It is a psilocybin-like molecule, and psilocybin's found in certain mushrooms. But unlike psilocybin, Reunion's candidate is designed to deliver a shorter psychedelic experience, and it is being tested for postpartum depression. The first line of treatment for postpartum depression is SSRIs, and while SSRIs do help improve mood by regulating hormone levels, they don't always work for everyone and they do come with certain side effects. So, a new therapy like Reunion psychedelic could broaden treatment options for people. And the company reported phase 2 trial results a few months ago, and they also raised $133 million in funding. So we'll be able to really tell this year how it SSRIs.
There's MapLight Therapeutics, but this time they're looking not so much at postpartum depression or anything there. It's schizophrenia, Alzheimer's psychosis. What made you interested in them, and what are you watching for?
Exactly. It's in the clinic. The lead candidate is in the clinic to treat schizophrenia and Alzheimer's disease psychosis. And actually, this week they announced that the FDA granted this candidate fast track designation for Alzheimer's disease psychosis. What makes the candidate stand out is that it is a muscarinic agonist, and this type of drug targets receptors which, when activated, regulate neural circuits that are linked to cognition and psychosis. And the only muscarinic agonist that's been approved by the FDA to treat schizophrenia is Bristol Myers Squibb's Cobenfy. And MapLight's lead candidate has been found to potentially be more effective than Cobenfy, so that's promising. And also the company went public in October, so I think these point towards a promising future.
We've got 3 then so far in neuroscience, neurology, but outside of that, you picked up on Hope Medicine. Now they're working in endocrinology, metabolic disorders, cardiovascular disease. There was something in their endometriosis program that you like to look at.
Yes, endometriosis and gynecological care are fields that interest me. Endometriosis research is significantly underfunded, and most treatments are focused on pain management. Hope Medicine's endometriosis candidate blocks the prolactin hormone, which is linked to the development of abnormal cells outside the uterus, which is what causes endometriosis. And by preventing the hormone from binding to its receptor, it's aimed to reduce pelvic and menstrual pain, which has been proven in clinical trials. And also, the candidate was awarded fast track designation from the FDA. So I think that's another one to watch out for in 2026.
Your number 5 choice was Regenxbio. They're in gene therapy, but you mentioned in your write-up there are already nearly 50 gene therapies that are approved, that are on the market. What makes these guys stand out?
Well, Regenxbio does specialize in gene therapies, and it's collaborating with AbbVie to develop a treatment for wet age-related macular degeneration, which is a condition that can lead to vision loss. But also, it's got another gene therapy candidate that's very close to approval for Hunter syndrome, which is a rare disease where the body is unable to break down sugar. Regenxbio actually filed for approval in 2024, but because of delays, the FDA decision date has been postponed to Feb 2026. So that's been quite a long wait for the company. But if it is approved, it would be the first ever gene therapy to be authorized to treat Hunter syndrome.
Fantastic. So it's something to look forward to, and maybe just in the next couple of weeks now. Summing up, it looks like you're focused on neuroscience, a lot of interest in neurology, like you said. Is this an area we can expect you to be writing a bit about in 2026?
Yes, I am quite keen on writing about neuroscience and reporting on what's going on in that field. I guess another theme would be, again, under the field of neuroscience, psychiatry and mental health, as well as gynecology and women's healthcare, which are all fields that I've written about in the past and look forward to covering this year.
And we look forward to reading about it. Roohi, thanks for joining us on Beyond Biotech.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's it for this episode. Don't forget to check out all the latest news and analysis at Labiotech.eu. I hope wherever you are in the world, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.